Do not open that!
Step back. Ma'am, step away from the trunk.
You're making a mistake!
Looks like I found exactly what I was told to find.
Lieutenant Wyatt, badge 4471.
You writing a complaint?
No. I'm preserving the record.
Seize the case.
Hidden evidence.
Those are protected attorney-client files. Then you shouldn't have put them in a car with dirty money.
About 150,000. That's a lot of trust, Professor.
If you take that briefcase, this stop becomes evidence.
Evidence of what?
Of how confident corrupt men get before they fall.
You're free to go.
No. Now you are. Marcus, he took the briefcase.
Tell me you have another copy. What the hell did she build?
The stop happened on Route 1 at 7:02 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. 2 units. 1 marked. 1 unmarked. The lights came on from half a block back too far for a speed violation. Close enough that whoever was watching had been waiting for her specifically. Alicia Vance pulled to the shoulder and put both hands on the wheel. She did not look afraid. Because she was not afraid. But she was careful. She was always careful. She watched the side mirror and counted the officers 4 and noted the blocking position of the marked unit and the way the unmarked car stayed back at an angle that kept its plates in shadow. The man who approached her window was tall, early 40s, with the kind of steady confidence that comes from having done a thing many times without consequence. His badge read, Wyatt, license and registration. No reason for the stop. No greeting. She handed both over, without a word. He looked at them too long. Professor Vance, Howard University. That's correct. Where you coming from this evening? Correctional facility, in Hyattsville. Client meeting. We're going to need you to step out of the vehicle. He said it with the particular flatness of a man who had rehearsed this sentence so many times it had lost all shape. We received information that this vehicle may be transporting proceeds from illegal activity. Alicia looked at him for 3 full seconds, not because she needed the time, but because she wanted him to see that she was counting. May I ask which officer authorized this stop? Step out of the vehicle, please. She got out. The secondary officer went straight to the trunk. He knew exactly where to look. He found the briefcase in under 30 seconds. He brought it to Wyatt, and they exchanged a glance. So practiced, it looked almost like communication. Wyatt opened it. Inside files. Hundreds of pages of files, and there's cash. The secondary officer said. He held up a bank bag. Banded. Looks like about $150. Ling, ling, ling. Professor Vance. Wyatt's voice stayed level. Can you explain what you're doing with this? Those funds are held in trust for clients. The files are privileged attorney-client work product. You don't have the authority to, under civil asset forfeiture. We don't require a warrant. He closed the briefcase. You'll receive a receipt. She looked at him. Something in his posture said he'd done this before. Many times before. And nobody had ever made it complicated. Lieutenant Wyatt, she said, I want you to be aware that I'm an attorney. Those documents are privileged attorney-client communications and protected work product. Seizing them may interfere with my client's access to counsel and this court's pending proceeding. We'll have it reviewed. He handed her the receipt. You're free to go. She took the receipt. She watched him carry the briefcase back to his cruiser. She stood on the shoulder of Route 1 for a while, after both units pulled away. Then she took out her phone and called a number she hadn't used in 4 months. It rang twice. Marcus, she said. He took the briefcase. Her phone rang again at 9:47 p.m. She was in her office at Howard. Lights off. Window open. Legal pad on the desk. She didn't recognize the number. She answered anyway. Professor Vance's young voice, trying to sound calm. This is DeMarco Ellis. You're my attorney. From the case, I know who you are. DeMarco. I heard what happened tonight. A pauser. My cousin works dispatch for the 4th District. He called me. He said they took your stuff. He said they took everything. His voice cracked on the last word, and he caught it and smoothed it back down. Professor, if they took your files, does that mean we lost? The hearing's Thursday. Does that mean, DeMarco? She waited until she was sure he was listening. Tell me something. When you walk into a building and you don't trust the elevator, what do? A pause. I take the stairs. Right. She looked out at the dark quad. They took one copy of those files. Silence. She could hear him breathing. There's another copy, he finally said. The court has had it for 2 weeks. The silence this time was different. The kind that happens when something you'd stopped believing in becomes possible again. So we get some sleep. She said, dress professionally Thursday. Bring your documentation. We're still going. After she hung up, she sat with the quiet for a moment. Then she turned to the legal pad and began to write. Carson Wyatt had not made it home when his cell phone rang. He was still in the parking structure, adjacent to the 4th District, sitting in his personal car with the engine running and the briefcase in the passenger seat. He liked to sit with things before he brought them home. It was a habit from early in his career. When he'd first learned what the job could be, the caller was Raymond Okafor. No relation to anyone who supervised property storage at the 4th District, and who had been cooperative with Wyatt for going on 3 years. Raymond had started being cooperative after the 3rd time Wyatt asked him to process cash without a case number attached. He hadn't been given a choice. Exactly. He'd understood that. What Wyatt didn't know was that Raymond had also, starting after that 3rd time, begun making a 2nd copy of every transfer log. He'd kept them in a folder at home. He told himself it was insurance. He hadn't decided yet against whom. Lieutenant, I went ahead and pulled the briefcase like you asked. Raymond's voice had something in it that Wyatt didn't like. A careful quality. I inventoried the contents. And, Sir, these files, they're civil rights complaints, traffic stops, forfeiture cases, multiple plaintiffs, a pause. There are badge numbers in the intake forms. Lieutenant, your badge number is in here. Multiple times. Wyatt's eyes didn't move from the windshield. Not panic. Analysis. How many plaintiffs, Sir? I'm counting at least. It looks like 31 intake forms. 31. Wyatt's jaw tightened once. Then released. 31 people could file a civil complaint. It would take months to work through the system. He had people in the court clerk's office. He had people at the state attorney's office. A civil complaint was manageable. I'll need those files held separately. He said, not standard processing. And Raymond, I'll need that cash in the unit account by morning. Standard channel. Yes, sir. I can do that. A pause. So brief. Wyatt almost missed it. Lieutenant, there's a case reference number in the files. I tried to look it up. It's sealed. Sealed. Yes, sir. The reference date is 2 weeks ago. I couldn't pull any details. Wyatt ended the call. He sat for a long time. The briefcase was in the passenger seat. He reached over and opened it and looked at what was inside, hundreds of pages, organized with the precision of someone who had done this for a very long time. He flipped to a page at random and saw his own badge number at the top of a handwritten timeline, a professor. He told himself. He thought about those 3 seconds she'd looked at him, counting. He thought about the way she'd taken the receipt from his hand, deliberate. Like someone archiving a record, he pushed the thought down. He was smart. He was careful. He had people. A sealed filing was not a crisis. It was a complication. He started his car. He had work to do. At 11:15 p.m. Raymond Okafor got a 2nd call from Lieutenant Wyatt. Raymond, the cash from the Vance seizure, I need you to process it tonight. Full documentation. Standard channels. And then, I need it cleared to the unit account by morning. Raymond was quiet. For too long. Wyatt noticed something wrong. Sir, I'm going to need that in writing. Another silence. longer this time, that had a different quality from the first one. Raymond. Lieutenant, I am sorry. I need written authorization for any transfer over $10. Ling, ling, ling. It's policy. You know how it is. Raymond's voice had gone very careful, very flat. The voice of a man deciding something. If you can get me that in writing by 6 a.m., I can process it first thing. Wyatt told him he understood and ended the call. He didn't put it in writing. He wasn't going to put it in writing. What he did instead at 1140 p.m., sitting in his kitchen while his wife slept upstairs, was call a number that he'd used twice in 8 years and hoped to never use again. A man named Delacourt, who was not a police officer and had never been a police officer, and who provided a specific kind of service to specific kinds of people who had specific kinds of problems. Alicia Vance. Wyatt said, Howard University Law. I need to know what you can find. How soon? Call me in the morning. He hung up. He went upstairs. He did not sleep well. By 8 a.m. the next morning, Wyatt was in motion. He was good at motion. 15 years of building something careful and invisible had taught him that the worst thing you could do when a problem appeared was freeze. You moved. You tightened. You found the loose thread and pulled it before anyone else could. He made 4 calls before 9. The first was to the unit's contact at the state attorney's office, a relationship built on 8 years of mutual benefit. The message, any active federal inquiry touching the 4th District's Asset Recovery Unit. The answer came back in 40 minutes, nothing on record. Wyatt filed that as useful if there was a class action under seal. It hadn't crossed to the criminal side yet. The second call was to a sergeant at the 4th District he trusted with operational matters. He needed someone to go to Alicia Vance's faculty office, not approach her, just observe. When does she arrive? Who does she meet with? Does she look like a woman who's regrouping or a woman who's already made her next move? The sergeant called back at 11. She's teaching. 9 o'clock, evidence class. Packed room. She looks a pause. She looks like someone who had a perfectly normal Tuesday evening. Wyatt didn't like that. The third call was to his contact in the clerk's office at the federal courthouse. He had a sealed case number reference from Raymond's read of the briefcase files. He needed to know what was filed under that number, who filed it, and when. The contact came back to him at 1 p.m. His voice was different from usual clip. Careful. Like a man reading from something he didn't want to be seen reading. Carson. There's a class action in Osei's court, filed 2 weeks ago. Under seal. 31 plaintiffs. Primary counsel of record is Alicia Vance. Wyatt's grip on the phone tightened once. When's the hearing? A pause that lasted 1 beat too long. Tomorrow morning. The contact said 9 a.m. The parking garage was quiet around him. Somewhere below. A car reversed out of a space. The sound echoed off the concrete and faded. Tomorrow morning. He'd spent 18 hours thinking he'd seized her evidence. He'd spent 18 hours thinking he had weeks, maybe months, before anything moved. He'd spent 18 hours telling himself this was manageable. She had filed 2 weeks ago. The briefcase was her copy. The hearing was in 16 hours. Everything in the court system was already there and had been there before he ever turned on his lights on Route 1. Carson. The contact said, quieter now. Your badge number is at the top of the respondent list. He ended the call without answering. He sat in the parking garage of a shopping center in Bowie and did not move for 4 minutes. Not because he was frozen. Because he was finishing the calculation and every path he ran ended the same way. He sat with that for 4 minutes. Then he picked up his personal phone and called Delacourt. I don't need background anymore. He said, I need dirt, misconduct, personal problems, financial irregularities, anything that creates a credibility problem in front of a federal judge, and I need it by 6 a.m. That's a different price than background. I know what it costs. The fourth call made from his second phone to a number saved under a grocery store Chain name was to the man Wyatt thought of as his insurance policy, a deputy director at the FBI Washington field office who owed him a favor that dated to 2016 and had never been put on paper. I need a procedural delay on a class action in Osei's court. Wyatt said, hearing is scheduled for tomorrow, 9 a.m. I need it pushed. 30 days minimum. The deputy director said nothing for a moment. Carson. What's the case? Asset forfeiture civil action. Plaintiff's counsel may have procedural issues with evidence admissibility. Whose counsel? Wyatt hesitated. One beat too long. Alicia Vance. He said. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from any Wyatt had heard in a long time. Not hesitation. Not calculation. Something more like the sound of a door closing. Carson. The deputy director said, slowly. Alicia Vance wrote the Baltimore indictment in '97. I know that. She put 19 officers in federal prison. I know. She did it with a DOJ unit that was smaller than the task force I run right now. And she did it in 14 months. And the conviction rate was 100%. A pause. You stopped her car. Wyatt said nothing. Carson. I can't touch this. There's a coordination order coming from DOJ this afternoon. I can feel it. Anything I do puts me in the picture. His voice had changed. The favor had evaporated. You need to talk to a federal defense attorney. Tonight? You owe me. Wyatt said, I know. The deputy director's voice was flat and final. I don't owe you this. The line went dead. Wyatt sat in the parking garage for a long time after that. Outside, the afternoon traffic moved through Bowie like it did every Wednesday. Normal. Indifferent. He had one play left. He called Raymond Okafor, the cash. He said, I need it moved tonight. No paper trail. I need it out of the property room before the morning. Raymond was quiet for several seconds. When he spoke, his voice had changed, and Wyatt recognized the change, the way you recognize weather before it arrives. Lieutenant, I already told you, I need written authorization for any transfer. Raymond. Wyatt's voice dropped. We have an arrangement. We've had an arrangement for 3 years. I need you to remember that arrangement right now. I remember it. Raymond said carefully. I also remember that I kept documentation. All of it. Every transaction. Every transfer. Dated and signed. A pause. Lieutenant. I think you should talk to a lawyer. Wyatt ended the call. He pressed his palm flat against the steering wheel and held it there. The arrangement Raymond mentioned, the records Raymond claimed to have kept if they existed. If Raymond had really been copying documents for 3 years, then every transfer Wyatt had ever made through the property room was on paper somewhere. Everything he'd built, everything he thought, was invisible. He drove home. His wife had made dinner. He sat at the table and didn't eat it. After she went to bed, he took out a yellow legal pad and wrote down every name he knew. People in similar operations across the district. People who might be exposed if his case became a template for investigation. Elevenamus. Not to protect them. To think. To understand the size of what was moving. He had no moves left. He knew this. He was smart enough to know when the board was finished. He sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning. And then he went to bed. What Wyatt didn't know what, he had no way of knowing. Because the car he'd used for surveillance work for 4 years looked exactly like a tired blue Camry, was that Alicia had installed a hardwired dashcam with cloud upload capability 17 months ago. Not because she'd known Wyatt was going to stop her, because she'd known that someone eventually would. The footage had finished uploading to a private server at 7:58 p.m. 36 minutes after the stop. Marcus Webb had watched it twice by midnight. He called her at 1230 a.m. The audio is clean. He said, video is clean. You can see the briefcase being taken. You can hear the entire exchange. You can read his badge number in 2 separate frames. A pause. Alicia. This is the stop. I know. This is the stop that connects everything, with the financial forensics. With the plaintiff's affidavits already in the court filing, this puts him in the room, literally on camera committing the act. I know. Marcus, there's a problem. He said it carefully. Tell me. DOJ hasn't ruled yet on whether dashcam footage from private vehicles is admissible in her court without advance notice to the respondent. She's never had to rule on it. And she's thorough. Alicia, she might want to hear argument before she lets us introduce it. Alicia was quiet. If she excludes the footage, Marcus said, we still have the affidavits and the financials. It's still a case, but it's not the same case. He paused. The footage is what ties the pattern to him personally. It's what turns the financials from suspicious numbers into an act we can put on a screen. Without it, I understand what it means without it. I'm calling at 12:30 in the morning because I need you to hear me say that this is not law. There's a real possibility that the most important piece of evidence gets excluded at the 7 a.m. Chambers meeting. She looked at the legal pad on her desk, the list she'd made, the columns. What does your read on DOJ tell you? 50-50. Marcus said, she's fair. She's also not going to let the integrity of her proceeding be compromised by a procedural gap she can't close. If there's any ambiguity in the admissibility question, she might table it. Then we're at 50-50. Yes. She set the pen down. She looked at the legal pad, the columns she'd built over 14 months, every contingency she'd mapped, every backup she'd prepared, and in the space where the dashcam footage should have been a certainty, there was a word she hadn't written there until now. Maybe. She picked the pen back up. She crossed out times, maybe times, and wrote times, brief. Then she started writing. She thought about DeMarco Ellis, turning his cap in his hands, stopping himself from hoping. Then we go in at 50-50. She said, good night. Marcus. She did not sleep. She prepared. By 5 a.m. she had drafted a 14-page brief on the admissibility of private dashcam footage in civil rights proceedings, citing 7 federal circuit cases and 3 pending Supreme Court petitions. By 6 a.m. she had sent it to Marcus, who read it in 40 minutes and called back to say it was the strongest emergency brief he'd seen in a decade. By 6:45 a.m. she was in the courthouse. She took the stairs at 6:58 a.m. from a conference room on the 2nd floor of the U.S. District Court. An FBI Public Corruption Task Force agent called Raymond Okafor. Raymond was not at work. He was at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and he looked at the number for a long time before answering. It was an agent from the FBI Public Corruption Task Force, and what she told him, in a calm and measured way, was that the federal government was aware of the property room's involvement in the Asset Recovery Unit's operations, and that cooperation at this stage would be noted and weighed accordingly, and that if Raymond had anything he wanted to put on record before the 9 a.m. hearing, now was the time. Raymond was quiet for a moment. He thought about the written authorization Wyatt had asked for, the one he hadn't given. I want immunity. He said, that's not something I can guarantee. Then I want it in writing that I cooperated voluntarily. He paused. I can give you the transfer records going back to 2018. All of them. I kept copies. The agent was quiet. Raymond. She said, you kept copies. I kept copies. He said, I didn't know what I was going to do with them, but I kept them. Wyatt arrived at the courthouse at 7:45 a.m. He was not expected. He had not been asked to appear, but his union attorney had filed an emergency request to be heard on the dashcam admissibility question 30 minutes earlier, and Judge DOJ had allowed it, not because she intended to delay the hearing, because she intended to close the door on the argument permanently, in front of everyone who needed to hear it close. He was in the lobby when his phone buzzed. A text from Delacourt. Nothing. Woman is clean. Doi from 2011 to 2011. Left voluntarily. No misconduct. No complaints. No debt. No personal problems. Whatever angle you're looking for, isn't there? Wyatt read the text twice. He thought about what it meant that she'd worked at DOJ for 11 years and left voluntarily. He thought about the 1,997 indictment he vaguely remembered reading about at the academy. 19 Baltimore officers. Federal conviction. One of the biggest police corruption cases of that decade. And it had been written by a DOJ attorney named. He stopped in the middle of the lobby. He took out his phone and searched Times 1,997 Baltimore Police Federal Indictment, DOJ Civil Rights. The first result came up in 4 seconds. The photograph showed a woman in her mid-30s, standing outside a federal courthouse in Baltimore, holding a thick folder in one arm. The caption read Times DOJ attorney Alicia Vance, whose indictment led to the conviction of 19 BPD officers, speaks to reporters. He looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the 4th floor, and rode up to Judge Osei's chambers to do the only thing he had left, throw himself on the procedural question of the dashcam footage and hope it bought him enough time to build a way out. It didn't work. Judge Osei read the admissibility brief in 31 minutes. Alicia knew this because she was sitting outside chambers watching the clock. At 7:47 a.m., the door opened and the judge's clerk asked her to come in. Wyatt was already in the room, with a union attorney and a look on his face that Alicia recognized the specific expression of a smart person who has just finished calculating and doesn't like the result. Judge Osei sat at her desk. She did not look at Wyatt. She looked at the brief in her hand. Professor Vance, I've read your emergency filing. She set it down. The circuit cases you've cited are applicable. The footage was captured lawfully, on public property, by the vehicle's owner. There's no Fourth Amendment issue for the plaintiff. My concern was noticed to the respondent. She looked at Wyatt. Lieutenant Wyatt, the dashcam footage was captured during a stop that your unit initiated. You were present. You were aware there was a camera on the dashboard. She paused. Do you dispute that? The union attorney started to speak. Judge Osei held up a hand. I'm asking the officer, Wyatt said, very quietly. No, Your Honor. Then notice is not a barrier. She closed the brief. The footage is admitted. We proceed at 9. Wyatt's attorney leaned toward him and said something close to his ear. Wyatt shook his head. One small motion at 8:02 am. After leaving Judge Osei's chambers, Wyatt drove to the 4th District and surrendered his badge to Captain Delgado. He did not explain why. Delgado did not ask. Alicia gathered her files and walked out of chambers. In the hallway, she stood for a moment. The 50-50 had resolved. The case was whole. She took out her phone and texted Marcus Times footage in "See you at 9." Then she went to find her clients. She found DeMarco Ellis in the corridor outside room 14, standing against the wall with his cap in his hands and his eyes on the floor. He was wearing a dark blue button-down that he'd clearly ironed that morning. And the effort of it, the specific effort of a 22-year-old dressing carefully for the first formal proceeding of his life, made something tighten in Alicia's chest. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. Professor DeMarco. He searched her face. Young people were good at reading faces. They'd had to be. Whatever he saw in hers made his shoulders drop a fraction of an inch. Are we okay? He asked. We're going in. That's not what I asked. She looked at him. At the ironed shirt. At the cap that was going to get twisted into a cylinder by the time the morning was over. We're okay, she said. He nodded. He looked down at his cap. I was stopped 4 times. He said, in 18 months, 4 times. And they took money every time. I never got a receipt the first 2. Third time I asked for one and the officer looked at me like he stopped. Like I was making trouble by asking, You weren't making trouble. I know that. He looked up. That's what I mean. I knew that, but knowing it, and he paused. You're the first person in a uniform. I know you're not in a uniform, but the first official person who acted like what happened to me was real. Like it actually happened. Like it was wrong. Alicia looked at him for a moment. It was wrong, she said. And in about 2 hours, a federal judge is going to say so, on the record, in writing, for you and for 30 other people. His jaw moved. He pressed his lips together and nodded. And she recognized the specific effort of someone deciding not to cry in a federal courthouse hallway, which she respected enormously. Okay, he said. Okay. The courtroom filled. Denise Fulton, 62 years old, retired postal worker from Ward 7, came with her daughter and her granddaughter, who was 8 and wore her school uniform. Ronald Tren, the contractor from Capitol Heights, came with his wife. There were 28 others, ranging in age from 19 to 74, and they filled the plaintiff's gallery with a specific kind of presence, the presence of people who had learned that their problems were administrative, bureaucratic, not worth the time of official systems, and who had been told this so many times they'd begun to believe it, and who were now sitting in a federal courtroom because one person had decided that believing it was optional. Carson Wyatt was not in the room. He had surrendered his badge at 8 a.m. His union attorney had advised him to be elsewhere when the proceedings began. At 9 a.m., the sealed financial forensics entered the public record. 7 years, 847 documented seizures, 612 with no subsequent criminal charge. 100 million. 1 million total. R. 2 million in an investment trust under Wyatt's wife's maiden name, and then, at 7:20 a.m., the dashcam footage played in open court. The room watched in silence, the shoulder of Route 1, the October light. The officer who approached the window of a stopped car and said times license and registration times without a reason for the stop. The woman who looked at him for 3 seconds and did not look afraid. The briefcase being carried to the cruiser. The signed receipt being handed over with the particular casualness of a man who had done this so many times, it bored him. In the second row, DeMarco Ellis went very still. He was watching the screen with an expression Alicia had not seen on him before. Not fear, not anger, recognition, the exact cadence of the stop, the exact tone of the officer's voice, the exact way the trunk had been opened without asking. He had seen all of this before. From inside the car, beside him, a woman in her 50s put her hand over her mouth. Behind them, a man's voice said, very quietly, "That's exactly what they did to me." In the gallery, Denise Fulton's granddaughter watched the screen. Denise leaned down and said something to her. The girl nodded slowly. And when she looked back at the footage, her face had an expression that no 8-year-old should have to learn, the expression of something beginning to make sense that should never have had to make sense at all. Ronald Tran watched the bank bag get lifted from the trunk. He looked down at his hands. His wife tightened her grip on his. At 9:07 a.m., Judge Osei issued the preliminary injunction, immediate return of all seized assets, criminal referral to the U.S. Attorney, suspension of all unit members pending investigation. At 10:15 a.m., Carson Wyatt was arrested at his home in Bowie. The arresting agents found him in his kitchen, not running, not on the phone, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, like a man who had run out of moves and was waiting for the consequence to arrive. His wife watched from the doorway. The investment trust had been frozen at 9:48 a.m. There was, on the table beside his coffee, a yellow legal pad. He had been writing something. The agents photographed it before they took him out. It was a list of names, 11 names. None of them were Alicia Vance's clients. Alicia was still in the courthouse at noon, gathering files in the borrowed conference room. When Marcus knocked on the open door, he had the look of a man who was deciding how to start a sentence. She'd known him long enough to wait. The task force agent called me. He said, "Park." 40 minutes ago. Alicia continued stacking files, the yellow legal pad they found in Wyatt's kitchen. Marcus said, "Elevenamus." They ran them. He paused. "Alicia, they're not connected to the unit's forfeiture operation. They're from a different district, different precinct, a different asset recovery unit that apparently has been operating on the same model." Alicia set down the file in her hand. "Different district," she said. "Southeast. The unit there has been running for at least 5 years, based on what Park was able to pull this afternoon. They don't know yet if Wyatt was coordinating with them or just knew about them, but the operational fingerprint is identical." He paused. "Park is asking if you'd be willing to consult." She looked at him. She thought about DeMarco Ellis in the hallway, pressing his lips together, deciding not to cry. She thought about Denise Fulton's granddaughter in the school uniform. Watching a screen with those careful eyes, she thought about the 11 names on a yellow legal pad, 11 more people who didn't know yet that someone was coming. She picked the file back up. "Tell her yes," she said. She got back to her car at 1:30 p.m. Parking ticket on the windshield. Her permit had expired last week, and she'd forgotten. Again. To renew it, she took it off the glass and looked at it. $47. She put it in her bag and got in the car. She had a 4 o'clock lecture. Constitutional Law 2. The midterm was Friday. 17 papers were due Monday. And a new case file was going to be sitting in her inbox by morning. The kind of case that would take 14 months. Minimum. And would require her to know everything while telling almost no one, and would be carried mostly alone. She started the car. She thought about what she'd said to DeMarco times. "I do this so the next person who goes through it knows somebody's coming." She'd been doing it since 1990, 34 years, and the work was not smaller than it had been. If anything, it was larger and quieter, and required more patience than the person she'd been at 30 would have believed she could sustain. But she was still here. She pulled out of the parking structure and onto the street. And 3 blocks away she noticed a black SUV make the same turn she did. And then, the turn after that, she did not accelerate. She did not call anyone. She noted the plates. She noted the time. She took the long way back to Howard and watched, and the SUV peeled off after 8 blocks. And she didn't know yet whether it meant something or nothing. She filed it away. There are people who spend 30 years learning exactly how power breaks the law, not resisting it, learning it every mechanism, every gap, every moment the system decides that protecting people is inconvenient. They become something power has no category for, not a threat, not an enemy, a reckoning, patient as stone. Carson Wyatt thought he was seizing the evidence of a law professor. He had reached into the dark and closed his hand around the trap itself. If you made it to the end of this story, you felt it, the slow burn of watching someone take everything from a person who'd already thought 20 steps ahead. And maybe you asked yourself, how does someone stay that calm? How do you stand on the shoulder of a road at night, watching them carry your briefcase to their car, and not break? The answer, I think, is that Alicia Vance had stopped fighting for herself a long time ago. She was fighting for the next person, and the one after that. Here's my question for you. If you'd been DeMarco Ellis, calling that night, terrified that everything was gone, and the professor had told you there was another copy, would you have believed her, or has the system taken enough from you that believing feels too dangerous? Tell me in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, someone in your life needs to hear it. More stories like this one are coming because there are more people like Alicia out there, building cases in the quiet, waiting for the moment.